Welcome everybody to our event tonight, hosted by Texas Women's Department of Visual Arts. My name is Blake Weld. I'm the Technical Director and Gallery Manager. Before I introduce our tonight's speaker, I just want to let you all know this event is being recorded and it's going to be used for department records. So tonight, Hernease Davis is a photo-based artist using photograms, cyanotypes, sound, performance, and craft to emphasize her notions of self-care through the artistic process. The solo exhibition of her ongoing series, A Womb of My Own, Mistakes Were Made in Development, opened at the Visual Studio Workshop in Rochester, New York. Her work has also been selected for photography now at the Center of Photography at Woodstock and was included in The Surface of Things at the Houston Center of Photography, an exhibition featuring photographers working with cameraless techniques. She has also exhibited with Transformer Station, the International Center of Photography, Fowley Gallery, Rush Arts, and the Elizabeth Foundation of the Arts. Hernease is on faculty at the Visual Studio Workshops in Rochester, New York, and has served as a visiting lecturer at ICP Bard, where she led a course exploring empathy through art practices. Hernease earned her MFA from ICP Bard College and is currently in Rochester, New York, but resides in Brooklyn, New York. So let's give a warm welcome to our tonight's speaker.
Great. So excited to be here with all of you. Thank you, Blake, for inviting me. And yeah, it's just so wonderful to see your faces, and I'm glad that we're able to gather again after the aftermath of just weather anomalies going on. And hope you guys are all doing well today. I'm okay with any questions. So if anyone wants to ask during my talk, then that's totally fine. I am actually going to start with a video of my solo exhibition at the Visual Studies Workshop. It has a twofold, it's working twofold here. First, to give you an aspect of this ongoing series that I'm working on, A Womb of My Own, Mistakes Were Made in Development, because there are quite a few elements working together. But it's also kind of a part of my practice. Blake and I were kind of talking, and I alluded to that this has been a very tough week. And so this is also something that I sort of need to hear right now. And it's also an example of an installation of my work. What you're hearing there is the sound that accompanies that accompanied this installation at the Visual Studies workshop. It also was the very first time that I presented all of the different aspects of this series of work together. So that includes my photograms, this crochet installation, and this centerpiece is an example of that. Also, there are combinations where I have crocheted into photograms. And if you noticed at the end of that video that there are some feet at the end, so that was sort of an example of, those are my feet. I made this video as a way of demonstrating how one could interact with this space. How I approached this installation was to try my best to translate what I consider to be a very insular process. And whenever I do exhibit, and this being the first time this work was exhibit, but every time I do exhibit this work, I try to make sure that there are spaces within the gallery or whatever, wherever we are, where the visitor can rest. And so what you were seeing was me lying underneath a table that was also a display of these works here. Now, going into the space, you were welcome to lie down underneath the table, and underneath the table were crocheted pillows and blankets that are also a part of the series. And I'll just say that the title of the work, or of this ongoing series, is A Womb of My Own, and in parentheses, Mistakes Made in Development. And what I have been doing with this body of work for the now, I think, 6 years, is to create a psychological space that is a place where I can create work and also confront my own notions of trauma, and also I call it an internal empathic conversation with myself. And so essentially with this work, my main focus is on the process. So asking myself at every single step of the way, what it is that I need, what it is that I desire, what it is that I want to do, whether or not I like what I'm doing. And so also sort of starting off this talk with this, with these hums, it's an example of something that I've been needing. So I do make these hums for myself as well. And how I do make them, I layer my voice on top of each other in a cappella, and I call them hums in keys of whatever the note or the chord that I choose. And I usually choose a chord that has something to do with a song that I love or with some type of obsession that I have at the time. Each breath that I make, or each tone that I make, is one entire exhalation. So it is also a type of meditative process. So I wanted to talk about the different elements of the work, in particular and I call these the photograms, because, and I titled it the photograms just to kind of highlight that they're not the only part of this series, but I think it's probably the most exhibited part of my work are the photograms. This is number 1 and number 3, and they all have this series title, and only one photogram has a title other than the number. They're all in sequential order. And the way I make these, and if anyone is unfamiliar with photograms, it's a camera-less process. It's essentially a contact print, or if you can think of a paper negative. So to make these, I use photosensitive paper, darkroom paper for this. And for these pieces, I laid them out in a grid in my living room at the time. And to make these, I had to black out my apartment. So I make these in my apartment. I have to black out all the windows and lay them out. I lay on top of them, and I've set up a strobe somewhere in the room to just kind of flash, and I'm holding a remote trigger for that. But I use this space as a way of coping with stress, as a way of responding to some type of usually acute emotional need. So I make these as I need them. And I see this as a place for me to go in order to lie still. So what I think is just really wonderful about these pieces is sometimes I'm laying on top of them for about an hour or two. And you wouldn't necessarily know that unless I told you, because in order to take these, it only takes a millisecond in order to expose the paper. But what's most important for me is that time on the paper. And when I started making these, it was in response to what I call an acute, gosh, what have I been calling this thing? Essentially, like my life was kind of falling apart. I was under intense emotional distress. Things were really, really bad. And I had this need to make photographs, but in a way that was responsive to how I felt, which was this strange need to want to start my life all over again. And so not being able to do that, it's not possible to be reborn or to go back in time. But I realized, I'm an artist and I'm going to create something, or create in a way that can approximate that actual, to get as close to that fantasy, to get as close to that dream as possible. And so this body of work kind of rolled out from that need to do that. And photography is at the core of this series, because photography has been something that I've used for quite some time in order to understand my surroundings. And I kind of use it as a conduit for emotions, a way of exploring my questions about the world and my questions about myself. I've also had an emotional attachment to cameras. And I've had emotional attachments to being able to take some control of my surroundings in a photographic way. I'm showing you early photograms. So this is number 2 and this is number 4. And I'm also showing this to give you some sense of scale, but also because in the background, this is what I use for a lot of my promos. And I love this image because it was a collaboration between me and H. Eugene Foster, who is a wonderful photographer and an educator who I met through the International Center of Photography. And he took this image of me, and a part of the collaboration was to choose a place where he wanted me to be photographed. And I chose to be photographed in my studio at the time, and with number 5 on the left-hand side and number 7 on the right-hand side. Number 5 actually is the only image in this series that has a name, and it's called Charleston, because I made this piece in response to the massacre at Emmanuel AME Church in 2017. That happened the day after my birthday. I grew up going to AME churches, and it was a particularly distressful time. And I sort of, the way I'd been feeling compelled to do this impossible thing of starting all over again. The day of the shootings at AME Emmanuel Church, I had this irrational need to just hug them, or to just kind of hug all AMEs in like all over the world, because it was a unique experience of understanding and knowing, being able to sort of walk through what might have transpired. Because one thing about Methodists and also African Methodists is that services are methodical, services are the same. And so it was a very visceral and yet irrational feeling. So I named that, I went to my photograms in response to my feelings about that incident. And it was the first time responding to something that was sort of related to, but outside of the particular traumatic event that I had been dealing with. And also in terms of this collaboration with H. Eugene Foster, his question for us as artists was to respond to the prompt, what does it mean to say I am Black? And my response To his question, had to do with recognition and seeing, which also is part of the work that I'm doing, turned inward. So a lot of what I'm doing is trying to understand who I am, essentially. It's a simple explanation for something that has been quite difficult and has been something that has changed me for quite some time. I wanted to show you examples of my older work. I typically take stock of this because the work that I'd been doing before this series is, I always thought of it as very different. It's aesthetically different. My approach to this work was very traditional in a sense. But I realized that what I've been making for the past, I would say this is 2010. So for the past decade or so has been this documentation and sort of like photographic diary of my own emotional development. Here is work from a series that I did called in 2010, 2011 called Place Settings. And these are Black plastic bags that I collected while I was living in Harlem at the time. And I started taking photographs of these bags because I had this, again, this irrational impulse to pick them up off the ground in my neighborhood. And I was in grad school at the time, and I remember bringing these bags in and talking to my fellow grad students and getting feedback from them saying like, oh, you can just go to the bodega and ask them for bags from behind the counter. And I was like, no, that's against the rules that I don't understand that I have for myself. I need to find them on the ground. And so there's a bit of this, which I'm really grateful for. There was a bit of just this undeniable impulse to do this thing that I also thought was unbelievably gross and shameful. And I talked about it in a shameful way because I'm like, I understand that this is dirty, this is unclean. It has to be this particular way. But it also was interesting to me that that I connected with these objects in a very specific way, but didn't understand why. And so I decided to ground them in photography in a way that I understood. And this is how I've been working. And this is what I've been realizing as I've developed this current series of work, that I was doing what I'm doing now, even then, but unconsciously so. How I treated these were sort of like a mixture of sculpture and also just standard, very straightforward still life photography, where I laid them on velvet, so kind of like let them luxuriate in a way. And I took these photographs very carefully. I took a master printing class, or I took a photo class or a black and white darkening class with a master photographer, a master printer, in order to print these works. And they're very just treated them rigorously in every step of the process. And I didn't really understand what was going on for years. I continued to experiment with those materials. So wrapping them around dishes, photographing them in different styles. I used them as overlays in the darkroom. So creating like a hybrid photogram. I made self-portraits out of them. I just used them and collected them. I moved, I think, 3 times with this huge stash of black plastic bags because they were very dear to me, and I was very obsessed with my obsession with them, but also I guess the words for it is kind of interested in an almost like an outer body way, sort of like an outward look in my direction of like, you don't understand why you need these bags. This is weird. This is so interesting. This is like, will you ever figure this out? Like, what is this? And so I think I used them up until I no longer needed them for a few years, just kind of, not a few years, but I made so much work with these bags. And what I realized I was addressing was this sense of loneliness, feeling untethered, not feeling grounded in a way. Like I identified with these inanimate objects, essentially as these things that were floating through. And a part of that had to do with, I think at the time, living in Harlem, and to talk very locally and situationally, I didn't like living in Harlem as much as I thought I would, and was disappointed in that. It didn't feel like home in the way that I expected it to feel. But I realize now that this is a feeling that I have been grappling with probably my whole entire life. And it's just, I've been using, or I've learned to use photography in a way of answering these really difficult and emotional questions. And so I'll say that I would have considered myself a very more of like an intellectual, straightforward photographer, and who struggles with emotions. But I really am not. What I'm seeing through the work is that I was dealing with these emotional issues probably from the very beginning. So I'll say I'm gonna I don't know how much time we have, but I'm gonna play a little bit of an excerpt of another sound piece, because I stopped making photographs for a while because it wasn't serving me anymore. And this is also a time when I just didn't, yeah, it just wasn't helping me answer the questions that I need to answer. And I made this sound piece in response to that general time in my life feeling very stressed and anxious. And it became a part of the work later on. This is a rather early piece, but I'm just going to play a little excerpt of it for you guys. So that piece is hums and keys of G. So, and this is the piece that established, or helped me establish, all the rules around my current series of work, because I needed music in order to even leave the house. I deal with anxiety and I deal with depression, but I had noticed that there were certain songs that I needed in order to just get to work during the day. And since I was taking a break from photography, I decided to use this as an opportunity to make this for myself. And I'm classically trained, which is also why I talk about chords and things like this. And also why I pay attention to some of these things. I do notice patterns and textures and music that I respond to. And so I used music that I'd already been listening to, and in paying attention to what it is that I need to hear. But I also use this way of working as a way of responding to my needs and the things that I wanted. It was easier to do it. Well, I will say that from photography to music, music is something that I'm also very familiar with and I feel very skilled at. And at this time I needed a little bit of reassurance in my abilities as an artist and as a maker. So the parameters I set for myself were also intentional to make this something that was meditative. So at the beginning, I spoke about the other piece that was, it sounds a lot different. Again, layering my voice on top of each other in a cappella around a certain chord. This was more of an emotive piece where if I keep playing it, there's a lot of yelling at the very end. This is a way of releasing a lot of inner tension and anxiety, and also a way of working instinctively, and also a way of making something that I just really enjoyed and could listen to and could hear and could use uh, in order to deal. This is an example of the work that I started making when I started photographing again. And on the left-hand side is a self-portrait of myself at a job that I used to have way back when. And on the right is underneath a playground in near the apartment that I lived in at the time in Bed-Stuy. And this is umbrella that was just there, and then on the left is a doodle that I had made. And these are, I call them emotional photographs, but essentially it was a way of responding to this acute, traumatic, familial situation that that kind of precipitated all the works that I'm doing. And this is sort of like the road there. But I started walking around with my camera, again, grounding the world with photography. And how I approached this work was just to photograph whatever I felt like photographing. So again, continuing this idea of responding to my impulses and using photography as a way or as a conduit for expression. And then this is the image that it's a really important image to me. It's not, these used to be a part of the series and are not officially a part of the series anymore. But this is an actual mistake in development that had never happened and has never happened since. So I'll say that I'm a very meticulous printer, I'm a very meticulous developer, meticulous photographer, and had prided myself on that. And I will also say that I now know that I gravitated towards photography as a way of controlling my environment and as a way of controlling imagery and all other stuff. I also used to be a scientist, so there are, I think I was a little primed for the medium as well, but Black and white photography in particular did serve me as providing great comfort in knowing that I could photograph what I wanted and print it and be with it along every step of the way. And I think the only other time I'd ever made a mistake, well, it wasn't my fault. I'll just say that there was a run-in with a lab tech who accidentally took one of my containers with my loaded film, and I just said out loud, "Oh, I don't know which one has my film in it." And she just started opening up all the canisters, which was to my horror. She found my canister and exposed my film. And I'll just say that that's the only time I've ever had a mistake in the darkroom. And then this, where I loaded the film and I'll say I misloaded the film and the film stuck together in development. So it's partially, it's in certain parts it's overly developed and in other parts it's underdeveloped. When it came out of, during the washing phase and I saw what had happened, gosh, how I usually would respond to this is with a lot of self-flagellation, just being really hard on myself and just like, oh, I can't believe you did this, and a complete dismissal of the image because it isn't perfect. Or I'll say it technically did not go through the process in the way that I'm used to going through the process without a hitch. But I decided to make my contact sheet with this messed up roll of film anyway. And this was one of the last frames on that roll of film, and it was my favorite. And I'll say that by this time, I'd been taking my emotional photographs. I think I had made maybe 1 or 2 photograms and had been really thinking deeply about my approach to photography, and also how I was using it in order to ask questions about myself. One of those questions was, why do I need so much control? Why are there things that are holding me back in terms of my process? Are there things that I'm doing that aren't necessary, that are actually harming me? Are there things in this process that I can use in order to bring me more comfort? And again, those questions of like, do you like this? Do you enjoy this? Do you want to do this? I'll say that when I saw this come up on the contact sheet, it was sort of like a revelation of, it's, who I am right now thinks this is beautiful. Who I was before I began this process of asking myself these questions, or, even 5 years ago, would have felt like this was a great failure. But being able to see this as something that was a photographic metaphor for what I was doing, trying to tap into this impossible need to start over again, because with new understanding of my upbringing, understanding that there was a lot of lack of care, there's a lot of lack of emotion, and a lot of lack of so many things that even in knowing what I know now, even if I were able to raise myself again, even if I were able to start all over again, that it still wouldn't be a perfect process. There would still be, I'm an imperfect person. And so there's always room for things to go wrong, or things to not go completely the way that you would expect them to do. But as long as there is care there, then what can we do with that? I'll say that this image is incredibly important, and it's, even though it's not in the series, it is sort of the thing that really solidified for me in terms of my process, that I can let go a little bit more. So I'm showing these photograms now. On the left hand side, talk about mistakes. So this is me photobombing one of my installation images. I was trying to photograph number 9, and I forgot that I set the camera and walked right in front of it. But and on the right hand side is a small 16 by 20, relatively smaller photogram. But this is an example of a way that I started to let go, and also a way that I was sort of still holding on. So on the left hand side, it's still a self-portrait. They're also portraits of me. If you can see that my body is a little abstracted, it's not completely lining up. That's because when I went to make this photogram, I decided not to worry so much about making this perfect grid. But when I installed it, I still was not comfortable with breaking out of this shape. For some reason, I did ask myself, I'm like, well, what's more important? Is the grid important, or is your body lining up to make it very clear that this is a figure? Is that important? And I chose the grid and knew that this would have to be the last one, that I was ready to move on. But also on the right hand side is an example of a photogram that is sort of in the vein that I started to work with these images after Charleston, where I started hand applying the developer in the darkroom. And I have to credit this to a lecture that I attended by Kunie Sugiura, who is a New York-based photographer who also makes beautiful photograms. And I remember sitting in her lecture and her talking about her process in the darkroom, and how she doesn't even measure the developer, which to me was just sacrilege. She doesn't know her concentration. She doesn't know her times. She mixes things in out of order, but the images were so gorgeous that it kind of, again, I was like, oh, okay. So she does these things I never would have considered doing in the darkroom, because I'd never thought outside of that part of the process. I had started, I would say, taking panels out of the developer early, because I was losing details of my body. And so the first 5 photograms are me negotiating the darkroom process in a way of seeing like what how much do I want to lose? Am I adhering to, again, the times, blah, blah, blah. But after listening to her, it really freed me up even more to realize, let's just see what happens. So if you see the text right here, things started happening to the prints that I didn't really expect. This is number 11, where I decided to break out of the grid, and this is how my body looked when I took the photogram on the floor. This is number 14. This is the most recent photogram that I've made. And I also made it wrapped up in one of my crocheted blankets. But, and also this is an example of how I typically like to show this work. This is one of my favorite photograms. The way I typically show the work is without frames and without glass. And it also took me some trial and error to figure out how to best show these works. These are the largest works that I'd ever made at the time. And it also was unique in that when I started making these photograms, I never thought that anyone would want to see them. I did not think towards an audience outside of then my roommates who were wonderful in seeing like the first iterations, or my photo crit group that I belonged to, Dodge and Burn. So when I was asked to start exhibiting this work, then I made the decision that I wanted to have these as raw as possible. I also wanted them to breathe, essentially, and because one of the things that I love about fiber paper is how they respond to their environment, that they do move and they bend, and also how that translates this, again, this continuing development, this continuing conversation, but also I see it as a it terrifies me, it terrifies some exhibition professionals that I've worked with who are good friends now, but I'll say that this show in particular, this is a show in Houston, on the surface of things. And this show taught me that if I ever exhibit Charleston, that I have to let them know that these two panels are supposed to be crinkled. So it's kind of far away, but I've grabbed those edges. And so there are lots of, I think you can see it in this work here, there are lots of bends and lots of creases. And I never flatten these pieces. And also how they're exhibited was another inspiration from another photographer, lecturer, Allison Rossiter, who had displayed her images without frames and glass. I don't know where, but because she rarely shows her images this way, but she had come up with a hinging system. And that's a system, or something that's related to that, is what I use, so that when they are on display, they're allowed to move and bend and kind of and curl. And also I want viewers to be able to see the marks that I make on these pieces. And also in terms of this, it was also sort of an exercise in going against my need for perfection. It is sort of like a forced vulnerability on my part. So it terrifies me, it terrifies gallerists. You know, it's also something that is a part of the work where I'm just trying to, I know that I'll be okay with it, but I hold these things very dearly. I love my work. It's very hard to let it go. It's hard to leave it, but it's sort of this tension and this ongoing conversation that I'm having with myself with what's okay. And that it's also okay to be a little bit afraid of this work, because what's most important is that I do translate this feeling of vulnerability that is a very private moment, and try to translate that to others. This is a concurrent body of work that I'm working on right now. So at the moment I'm in Rochester, New York, on residency, and I recently did a residency at the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts with their Shift program. This is an installation of my most recent exhibition with them, called Permissions. And came down, I think, the end of January, so kind of recent. But the title of this work is New Love, and there's also some what do you call that? Oh my gosh, yeah. So the title is important. It's important that some quotation marks. It's important that there's a ... at the beginning, because it is a lyric from a Bjork song that's, and this ties it to my previous or my concurrent series of work. So I alluded to blankets that I make and that I set out for visitors to lay down on. This is an example of a blanket that's a part of the first of the A Womb of My Own series. This is a stone milker performance. So just how I make my blankets is that they're widths of songs that I sing in my daily life in order to relieve stress. So singing is another thing that I do. These are different than the hums. People get a little confused. They're not really related to the hums in any way other than that it's me singing them. And I'm using the music similarly. But here I use my stress songs as dimensions for the blankets. So I will crochet the first foundation chain is what it's called, as I'm singing the song. And when I stop singing, that is the width of the blanket. And then I add to the blanket's dimension, or the blanket's length, until it's my height. This is an example of an early iteration of Stone Milker, and this is me during a performance at Ideal Glass as a part of a performance series called Home Perm, where I'm singing Stone Milker. Stone Milker is also a Bjork song. It just happens to be Bjork. Sometimes right now it's Elton John, sometimes it's Adele, and also sometimes it has been Beethoven. It just kind of goes all over the place, but the core of that is I'm paying attention to the songs that I'm using in order to help me emote in response to stress. So the first blanket that I made was Unravel, another Bjork song, just kind of a coincidence. I really love Bjork. And the lyric in that song, if anyone knows the song, the whole lyric, it's one of the refrains, and it's the whole line reads, and when you come back, we'll have to make new love. And so how I title my series, I do it retroactively. I don't like titling things, which is also why I come up with a series title, and then each piece has a number typically. But the process of making these cyanotypes, it threw me into what I call a photo identity crisis, because I took the leap into making these because it was something that I'd been wanting to do, but didn't understand how I could fit it into my ongoing series. But I decided to do them anyway, and thinking that they would sort of work the same way as the photographs. These are self-portraits. But what I wanted to do with them I'm still trying to figure out how to talk about this. Basically, I thought I would get my figure. So I'm laying on top of this. I'm here somewhere. I'm in here somewhere. But how I want to work with them is slowly. And I want to approach these cyanotypes the way I've been approaching my photograms in the darkroom, which was slowly, just drawing out the development process, simply because it was the most enjoyable part of it. And this, I think, was maybe the second the second cyanotype. And the longer you do not develop a cyanotype, the underlying latent image starts to, I don't know the words for it, but essentially it just gets absorbed into the process. It gets to a point where I'm never going to get to the underlying image that my body made during the initial exposure time. And so I had to sort of deal with the absence of my body in these self-portraits as sort of a trade-off of of the thing that I really enjoy to do. So it's like, if I wanted to develop these the way that I wanted to, am I okay with not seeing an image? Also, my response to these cyanotypes surprised me in that I did miss an image of my body. I'll say that I let these go for a couple months. I went through a phase of being kind of angry about it, being a little disappointed that this is not the outcome that I wanted. Also a little confused as to my feelings of just like, oh, I don't like this. And again, this question of, do you like this? For 2 months, it was no, I don't like this. I'm also a bit of a pack rat, so I don't throw away work, and I kept them, which I was really happy about, because later on in the shift residency is when I decided to work on them, and sort of accept that I probably was never going to see my figure. I'm still okay with not seeing the figure. I have sort of released that for now. I might come back to it, and mostly it's because the process of making these cyanotypes are just so wonderful. So I approach them essentially the same way that I do all of the aspects of my work, instinctually. The marks that I make are intentional. I make sure that I'm satisfied with the shapes that I'm making. To make these shapes, I'm using paintbrushes, foundation chains, all sorts of things, which is also why I had a bit of a photo identity crisis, because I started feeling like a painter, and I'm not a painter. I can't draw to save my life. I don't know anything about brushes, and I love photography. so I was like, what am I doing? What is this? And so that's sort of been the process of getting into working this way. This is another look at this installation. This is inside of the installation. When I install these are, so all of them are part of the series New Love. Individually, I'm not really sure how I'm numbering them yet. And I will say that this is the first time that I had exhibited them. And I will say that I'm still working on some of the images. So the way this has been working on these fabrics, that they're very flexible. And so once I took this down, there are 2 cyanotypes that still allowed for me to continue to shift them and to continue to work with them as cyanotypes. And to explain what you're seeing a series of cyanotypes on canvas, silk, and linen, and they are attached, they're suspended from the ceiling using crochet. And this is an on-site installation, I'll say. So I crocheted these pieces, and I had a little bit of help from a good friend of mine who helps attach the crochet to the actual fabrics. And then in the space, I crocheted in the ceiling to shape the round that I wanted, and in order to shape their heights. I have an example of an installation shot where it was like an early iteration of this during a group show, but essentially I get on a ladder, get in the space, and I crochet and adjust as I go around to make this space. This is a view of the walls surrounding the round, I'll call it. And I use the walls as a place of mourning. It just so happened that during this installation, I lost 2 very important people in my life. And one of the things that I do when I mourn is I repeat names over and over again. I repeat their names, and decided that was how I would begin to, their names would be the first gestures on these walls. So I repeated their names, and what you're seeing is cyanotype chemistry on here. And let's see here, hopefully this doesn't have sound great. I'm just going to show you sort of a video progression. So I would visit the installation every so often and continue to layer their names, and then it kind of became their names evoked other names of people that I've lost. And so I decided that this would just be a place to to mourn them. And so I would return to the space every so often, let the cyanotype chemistry shift and expose, and come back and continue to layer names on top. And I would make other gestures around these names, but essentially kept the evocation of their memory as a basis of this piece. And it also was, it's also important to me all the time to have something developing, something changing, and something shifting during when I am exhibiting. So either the photograms, the fiber paper moving and molding to their environment, or the cyanotypes that are partially developed, they continue to shift even when I'm not working on them. But to have something that's moving, something that's ongoing, again, as a way of communicating, even if it is in a subtle way, kind of communicating what my ongoing development, my ongoing emotional development, and how I've been using this work as a way of, yeah, I always say that I make this work and it changes me. And as I change, the work changes as well. So this is me. I'm writing my grandmother's name here. And so I'm going to play, hopefully this is not too long. So I'm going to play the sound piece that would be coming out of this cone here. And this sound piece was made specifically for this installation. And to let you know, it's in a key of C major, keys of C major, I'll say. then it just loops from there. And so I guess I'll just, oh gosh, just trying to see where I am in my, here, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know, I think that's all I have to say. I'm still working on this. Yeah, again, like there are two cyanotypes that I say that they are allowing me to work on them, because it sort of has become this ongoing conversation with this photographic process that I did not expect. Cyanotype is such a flexible medium, and it has surprised me in really wonderful ways, and it's challenged me in terms of experimentation, but also this, I don't know if the term is dissolution of my body, but I call this a self-portrait. So I consider the entire installation a self-portrait in a way, because, and I consider all of my pieces as self-portraits, the blankets, and all of it. And the cyanotypes in particular are something that surprised me, because so when I installed this work and on a placard, I made sure that we call them self-portraits, because if someone is coming to the show and they're seeing these cyanotypes being referred to as self-portraits and they're not seeing a body, then there is still some connection with my form, or with the photographic process and what it's doing, because essentially I'm there, I'm still there, my form is there. It's just sort of, I would say, perhaps melding with the process in a way that also speaks to, which, yeah, I'll just say, which is something that I really enjoy thinking about, because photography is so important to me in this process of self-care, and in this internal empathic ongoing conversation with myself as to who I am and who I'm becoming, I'll say. So I guess I can end there. If anyone has any questions, or I think there might be some chat questions that I might have missed, but yeah.
Aiden in the chat had a question about one of your first slides. He talked about how it resembles a tree. He's referring to the net structure in the middle of the room, and how it resembles a tree, and just wants to learn a little bit more about it and its significance.
Yeah. Oh, I love this piece. I call it, oh man, it's another Bjork song. I love Bjork, that's fine. I don't have to be apologetic about it. But it is an arm crochet piece. And I believe that this moment there are 7. I did a performance piece where I made an 8th blanket and installed it after, this is a lecture that I gave during the exhibition. And it is one of those spaces of rest that I wanted to create, and also you're able to touch it. So this is something that was really interesting, that the only visitors to the gallery who really took advantage of that were kids. And also I realized that this is a very strong structure, because I witnessed a toddler just completely toddle into it, but it held up, it's great. But again, like a space, some safe place to go. But it also is made up of these blankets. At the scale, I still maintain my dimensions. So it is the width of Anchor Song. All of them are Anchor Song on repeat, and they're my height. And these are attached to the ceiling, and you can actually go in. You can go in and like kind of walk around in that space. Yeah.
I think there's another question here. Colby Parsons, who's the
That was
director.
actually Michael, just giving him credit.
Oh, okay. Michael Mulvey, who's one of our graduate students, said, curious if you're using fiber-based papers or RC.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. Fiber, yeah. RC paper wouldn't behave this way, and it also wouldn't give me the leeway in the development, in terms of the development. So if you're familiar, well, yeah, you are, because yes, RC or fiber. RC just responds too quickly to the chemistry. So fiber is a lot more forgiving and flexible in that sense, but also has that wonderful quality of sculpting itself according to its environment. So RC tends to just kind of flatten out, but fiber paper, it's just a wonderful, very like a living material. So yeah, so they're fiber.
I have a question. So your smaller pieces, they look like maybe they're 11 by 14, the ones that were on the table. There's one on the left that was, you had crocheted. It's almost like, it's web-like, chain-like. Can you like talk a little bit more about, I mean, both, I'm so fascinated by both of these pieces, but especially the one on the left.
Yeah. And this is this is a sub-series, but it's Bear With Me Foundation, B-A-R-E, Bear With Me Foundation. This is number 1, number 6. This is number 2, and then number 5 that I did not label. But yeah, I crocheted around these, and I've treated them a little bit differently. This number 5 here, I've actually crocheted into the paper. So I crochet this in the dark, but with number 1 and number 2 here, I crocheted on gosh, like a scratch sheet of 16 by 20 paper in a way, and then encased it, exposed it together. So I treated these more like pillows rather than like perhaps like a whole sheet of a photogram. I still laid on top of them and developed them all together. And some of them are also treated with liquid light as a way of, for instance, this was soaked in liquid light at first as an experiment to sort of see what happens, but it also molded itself around the paper because just the way it dried, as a way of its, as the way it was treated, the paper dried first, and then the yarn dried later and sort of kind of hugged the piece. So there's a little bit of texture you can see there. But yeah, but these are 16 by 20 pieces of fiber paper, and I always display them flat because I think it's fun for people to see the back sides of them. I often get questions about what the backs look like. And it also, again, is that opportunity to lay out pillows for people to just, if you're going to look at the back, then I would love for you to just kind of like rest and have it be like a twofold thing as well.
I have a question. This is Colby Parsons. I am really curious about, I feel like photography can often be a medium that's really about like fidelity of representation, and it can be not as much about like hand making and the kind of openness to accident that it seems like you have arrived at. And I feel like maybe I could understand that somewhat through the way that your work has become about self-care. But I just wonder, what are your thoughts on hand making versus maybe what would typically be one's experience of photography, and the way that has evolved for you?
Yeah, well, also, and I'm gonna, there's something that I meant to mention about these 2 pieces that I forgot, Megan, because on this is a good example of improvisational stitch. This is the first time that I, or one of the first times that I did, or put in improvisational stitch. And I think it also speaks to your question, Colby. Yeah, I mean, became this exercise of getting across the paper and responding to, again, like what I wanted to see, but also incorporated crochet into the photograms specifically, and also kind of pulled on my skill because I grew up crocheting. I learned crochet from my aunt, and it's something that I typically do anyway in my life, that I decided to incorporate into this process because it's something that just gives me great comfort. I crochet on the subway because it just helps me get through the subway ride. But in terms of and hopefully I'm answering your question, Colby, but about the materiality and sort of the crafting of it, because it's I guess here it's such a straightforward example of craft because there is a craft technique incorporated into this photographic process. But even making the photograms, for instance, is something that in the way that I do, it's very slowly there. I'm a little unorthodox in the darkroom, I'll say. And a part of that, again, was hearing the experience of other photographers whose work I really loved and admired, and hearing them talk about their process. And using that as permission to let go of that part. Also, in terms of photography, the process has always been one of my most favorite parts of it. I've always been really sloppy. I'll just say my first photo class, I really didn't care about the prints. I cared about getting good prints, but in terms of showing them or exhibiting them, it was something that I had to learn to pay attention to. And I remember I got an A- in the class because my final report was like slightly sloppy. And so, because I loved the chemistry and I loved, that magic of development, I loved being able to, I love learning different techniques and being able to control, control the light and control the contrast, and also this way of self-discovery, of discovering what my preferences were of a print. Learning that I like contrast. And it's something that I remember I still am very proud that I love contrast. I just kind of like dramatic prints. And so that craft part of the process is something that I've always loved. I don't do well with the end part. So that exhibition part or the showing, the framing, the final part of it, that's personal. I just have an issue with making decisions. And that's something that I've learned in grad school when we were doing our group show together. It gave me a major migraine deciding where my images were going to go and also how I was going to display them, because I just, that was my least favorite part of it. So I've always considered that the making as the most enjoyable. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to hear more of your thoughts on it because it's a really nice blend between them. And it seems like you've gradually you've like leaned into that, and
Mm-hmm.
There was that early stuff you were like representing things, even if it was also about this loneliness and other stuff. But now it's like you've really just dived into getting your hands into every part of it you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also just love like listening to I wrote it down. I like listening to you talk about control, but also in the darkroom and the process of developing the print. And you said something about being with the process every step of the way. When it is ready, taking it to the next stage. And it's such a metaphor. I mean, for what, like how you're treating the process, right? But as a person who's like been in the darkroom, like slinging prints, like, is like so timed and controlled and all this stuff, that it's so much of like this more fluid self-care. And it's just like a metaphor for like you and your process for like when you're ready, you're going to go to the next stage, even with this more current piece that you're doing, you're like, this cyanotype piece is allowing me, to kind of move to the next step. It's lovely. Aiden has something
and
to
I'll
say.
Oh yeah, go ahead. Oh no, I want to say that even though I enjoyed it, I'll say that it was it's almost like I know that it's a good step if it's a little terrifying, which is sort of where I am right now with the cyanotype. So I'm like, how do I know when I'm finished? And it goes again to, I guess, my dislike of the final stage of showing prints or exhibitions, or it's about the making the decision, because it's so incumbent on how you feel, or it is such a personal responsibility. And so making those types of decisions that are so subjective and based off of just what do I think, what do I want to do with this, coming from where I've come from or being the person that I am, those are incredibly difficult to do, to make these choices and to sit with them and to be okay with them. So when I'm developing these, you know, and I'll talk about number 2 was an example of this. You can't really see it, but these 2 panels are underdeveloped. And that was sort of the first time, because I saw detail being, I saw the highlights disappearing. And at that time, it was, again, like sacrilege to not go the whole entire process. And I remember rescuing them and saving them, saving this highlight detail from being developed out, and being really afraid of what that would happen to the final image. I'm like, well, did I do this correctly? Will this last as long as it could? What the panel looks very different from the other panels, and also then thinking about, do I care about this? What is more important to me? And if this makes me uneasy, why does it make me uneasy? This is something that I want, and yet it is difficult to choose that. So it's like an ongoing exercise in that sense. So yeah. Who was it, Eden or?
Aiden.
Aiden.
Yeah, Aiden, you had a question. He said, how did you do these prints again? He said, no camera, question mark.
Yes, they're photograms and cyanotypes, also without a camera. Yeah, I mean, again, this was really about what did I need in taking photographs in a way that was very uncomfortable, because again, you know, not able to control anything other than what my body is doing and how high am I going to set my strobes. So yes, so it's essentially you take a photosensitive piece of paper, and usually you would learn how to make photograms first day of black and white darkroom, but you take an object and you place it on top of the photosensitive piece of paper and expose it to light. So essentially everything that the light touches is what gets exposed, and when you develop it will turn black. And then the object, whatever is touching on the paper, remains white. So essentially, you know, my body is that object and everything around me is black because it was exposed to light. But this is a photograph. It is a very rudimentary, almost a very elemental type of photograph. But yeah, does that make sense? Okay, hopefully, yeah.
I guess. I'm the one who asked the question, by the way, Aiden.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so it's sort of just how, and again, with the cyanotype. So if anyone is unfamiliar with cyanotypes, this is a UV activated process. It doesn't respond to other types of light. So essentially, photosensitive means light sensitive, and it just depends on what kind of light. For instance, darkroom paper is not sensitive to red light, for instance, but red rays of light. So you're just using a substrate, a surface that will respond to light. And when it's developed, the image that you see is the object that was blocking that light from being exposed on the paper or the substrate, like whatever you're using. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Hello, my name is Cher. I just wanted to say I really appreciate the way that you're talking about your artistic process, and how you talk about the meticulousness that you like to do within your work. And there's a lot of things about how you were talking about your process that I connect with similarly in how I work. I enjoyed when you recently just talked about with your stitching. I do photographs, and then I've been incorporating embroidery in a lot of my work. And I've never considered myself an embroiderer, and just picked it up in the last couple of weeks. So it's like, I don't know the technicalities per se of, how you're supposed to do things. And so when you were talking about with your crochet process, where you were doing more improvisational stitches, and I feel I do a lot of that instead. I appreciate you talking about how you work more instinctual, and being a pack rat, I do things similarly, not wanting to let these things go. And so hearing you talk about not wanting to let go of that control, and in ways that, working instinctually kind of helps you, or at least helps me, in how to let go, and in ways work through those emotional connections and questions that I'm asking, similar, how you're doing, what does this mean? Why am I doing this process? What is the connection with it? Constantly asking myself questions when I'm working with it. So I really appreciate you talking about how you do that within every piece that you work through.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, and it's so funny because I work with crochet improvisationally because it's more fun. And there are other things that I like to use patterns for instance, my blankets. And yeah, and so even seeing how I can work in those two ways and sort of respond in a sense, because I'll say that crochet is an incredibly important part of this, because it's also, again, something that like connects me to my favorite aunt, who still crochets. And so we exchange patterns sometimes. And so it's nice to be able to incorporate that into my work. And she's someone who at a later time, like, or an earlier time, also had like these creative ambitions. And I recently discovered that she made this amazing lace dress that she has the type of skill that I can only aspire to. And so it's like that's an integral part of the work, but also that it's fun, like it's enjoyable, it's very soothing. And I think the less you know, sometimes it's the better, because then you're not constrained in a way. And there's less to let go of, but there might be a little bit of that overarching feeling of like, oh, I'm doing something wrong. But it's not necessarily about wrong or right. It is that I would say that what's more important there is, again, these decisions that you're making, whether or not they're conscious or unconscious, however you want to approach the work. And craft in particular, and also embroidery, it's just a wonderful way of expressing your hand in a very tangible way. But also, again, it's this being present and being and for me, it's about the decisions that I'm making. And do I do it? And with crochet, it's sort of like, how do I want to get across this page? What do I want to see? And since I know crochet quite well, I can imagine the things that I want to see. And so I'll make the stitch and kind of continue and work in that way. It's really, really a lot of fun. So yeah.
I have a question. Hi. I
Hi.
really enjoyed the sound pieces, and I just wanted to say, I wrote something down. I think a lot of your work sort of feels like enveloping the viewer. I'm imagining being in the space, and sort of I wrote down feeling held by. And the sound pieces really, I mean, like, you've improved my day, so thank you. But I was curious about the work, like the net piece that you say people can enter, and like the sound work. How do visitors respond to the pieces? And do they, do you notice, because galleries have these sort of weird interactions. So I was just really curious how people respond, especially to some of the sound pieces.
Yeah, that part is, it is it's almost hard to articulate because it's such an emotional response. And also, so it's always something different, but I'm always surprised that I'll go to this piece here that this was showing during semi-lockdown in New York. And I know from the gallery assistant that people would come in, and there was a person on the first day who sat there for 10 minutes, and which was encouraging to me because this is the first time I've ever done this type of installation. I was going through a lot of, just like, does it look good? Like, is this okay? And how will people respond to this? I typically do get wonderful emotional responses from people, wonderful conversations when I'm able to be in the same space as someone who's interacting with my work. I think, yeah, so one of the strongest reactions I've gotten was with the very first exhibition, I'll say, where there's a woman who didn't even want to come into the gallery. She just sort of like looked at it from afar, and her response was, "Oh, there's a lot of grief in there." And I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of grief. I was just like, yeah, a lot of grief, yeah, sure. But she had been dealing with, she was a professor at SUNY Brockport and had just led a class about the Middle Passage, and very, very heavy emotional course. And it was the final day, and she, sort of went through a healing ceremony with her students, and then came over to my show and then saw what she interpreted as nets. This is to me, I don't see nets, and talking to her was helpful in seeing how people were interpreting something that I see as crocheted blankets. And she made the association with water and the association with the Middle Passage and with that historical grief. And even though that isn't the grief that I'm dealing with, I was just really, I don't know, I was overwhelmed by her reaction and her response to that. I've had conversations about mothers, and especially with other people who have difficult relationships with their mothers. So it's always surprising, but it does tend to bring out really wonderful and complex conversations about emotional relationships with, historical or familial, but typically emotional. And so this is something that I didn't anticipate with this work. And it's one of my favorite things about showing these pieces in particular, in getting to share them, especially since this is such a private practice that I have. These usually start alone. I'm always alone when I make these pieces. The photograms in particular are in the dark. I'm laying on them for an hour or so. It's a purposefully insular, solitary process. So that's just sort of how it's been. And it's kind of like the work gets activated in a different way, that it's also reflecting onto me, because I can't control that. I can't anticipate that. And it also is something that I even don't really know how to articulate. And so it's sort of this wonderful conversation, and also this mysterious thing that happens with the work. It's really wonderful. Yeah. Any other questions? Or is there anything from the chat that I missed?
I think that's it. Thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Thank you.
This is amazing.
Yeah, you guys ask great questions. This is so wonderful.
Yeah, we're so grateful. Thank you so much for coming and being with us today. I mean, yeah, echo Julie's sentiment. She's actually our new media fibers and foundation
cool.
extraordinary professor. And yeah, I echo her sentiments. Like, you've made my day better for sure.
Oh, that's so great.
Mhm.
This was just
Yeah,
lovely.
yeah.
I'm so excited.
So glad to hear that. Yeah, thank you all.